This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Under Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP underwent a meteoric rise. They went from a party that sometimes won a handful of seats in Westminster elections to one that reliably took nearly every seat in these elections, whilst also leading their own majority government in the newly created Scottish Parliament. Despite a slight reduction in seats in the 2017 general election, the SNP have looked pretty much unstoppable for the last decade and a half. Right now, though, with Sturgeon gone, the party is in disarray, and the SNP poll numbers are declining by the day. So it's worth asking, is everything going wrong for the SNP? And if so, why? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by looking at the SNP's performance and see whether things truly are going wrong for them. The best way to do this is by looking at the recent polling of the SNP, who in essence had been ahead of other parties in Westminster polling since the end of December 2022. Back then, around 40% of respondents claimed that they would vote for the SNP if there was an election the next day. This was around a 10-point lead ahead of Labour. Ever since Sturgeon announced that she would step down, this lead has been narrowing, and last week this gap finally closed, with the SNP and Labour finally level on 35% each. This is a massive drop in support for a party that was once seen as the dominant electoral force in the country. Now, it's worth moving on and looking at why this is, and from what we can see, there are three main reasons things are going wrong for the SNP. First, the internal chaos in the SNP leadership. Second, the confusion around the party's independence plans. And third, domestic problems that are being overseen by the SNP government in Holyrood. So let's have a look at these in turn, starting with the internal chaos. As we mentioned at the start, the SNP looked like they were in a particularly strong position with Sturgeon at the helm. Her electoral success silenced any internal opposition to her ideology, or her specific policies. The party was happy to unite around her in the good times, and these good times were plentiful in her near-decade-long tenure. However, following a bruising internal debate about transgender rights, Sturgeon resigned, claiming that it was the right time. Not long after her resignation, the police opened up an investigation into Peter Morell, Sturgeon's husband, and then Sturgeon herself. Both were arrested. As part of this investigation, other key figures in the party were investigated and arrested, which built a sense of chaos around the party. This came at an inopportune time, as the party was in the process of an already bruising leadership election. As part of this, some pretty big dividing lines within the party were exposed. For example, Kate Forbes, the finance secretary and someone who was previously thought to be more of a centrist, received a lot of attention due to her membership of the Free Church of Scotland. The church is socially conservative on abortion and LGBTQ+ issues, and although Forbes claimed that she would make her own decisions on these issues, some of the decisions she claimed she'd make didn't seem all that progressive. She claimed that if same-sex marriage wasn't already legal, she would not have voted for it. She also claimed that if she wasn't away on maternity leave, she would have resigned from the cabinet over the gender recognition reform bill. Forbes wasn't the only candidate whose views weren't all that socially progressive. Ash Regan claimed that, if elected leader, she would abandon the gender recognition reform bill, a bill she resigned her ministerial post in protest against. Yousaf was the only prominent candidate who candidly said that he would continue Sturgeon's progressive approach. He also claimed that he may turn down an offer to be in Forbes' government if she'd won. All of this essentially prompted questions about what the SNP's ideology is, especially from a social perspective. For her part, Sturgeon, and now her successor too, appeared to be progressive. As we explained though, a number of cabinet ministers didn't actually share this view. In fact, a YouGov poll from the end of 2022 also showed that a majority of SNP voters didn't agree with the changes that the gender recognition reform bill would go on to make either. So, all in all, the saga exposed the uneasy relationship between the leadership and the membership on social issues such as trans rights. A saga that's still hurting the SNP to this day. So, moving on to the second reason that the SNP is struggling, their confused independence position. Prior to her resignation, Nicola Sturgeon made clear her plans for making Scotland an independent country. She would first ask the Supreme Court whether she could unilaterally announce another independence referendum, without the approval from Westminster. She did this, and they told her that she couldn't. So she would then fight the next general election on the premise that people are voting either for or against independence. If a majority of people voted for parties that advocated for independence, she would view this as consent from the Scottish people to pursue independence. In October, the SNP will host their national conference, in which they'll vote on this strategy. Now, independence is, and always has been, one of the SNP's defining policies. Sturgeon's plans for this were very much tied to her, and there was always speculation about whether her successor would continue them or not. It was already a confusing plan, and not one that was guaranteed to work. Even if pro-independence parties did indeed receive a majority of votes in Scotland in the general election, this alone could not force the Westminster government to allow Scotland to secede. In fact, as the Institute for Government argues, it's likely that they would still block it. So, with the SNP not currently agreeing on a plan for independence, and Sturgeon's plan already looking dubious, it's doubtful that this is helping their current predicament. Lastly, let's move on and discuss domestic issues. Right now, First Minister Youssef is presiding over a bit of a black hole in Scotland's finances. In total, this comes to about £1 billion, something that he's keen to try and rectify. If he doesn't, this spending gap is expected to double between 2027 and 2028. It's been suggested too that in order to fix this, he may well need to raise taxes, something that is obviously far from popular. However, some, such as the Scottish Retail Consortium, have suggested that raising tax alone will not be enough, and that there needs to be a candid review of spending and new thinking about how services are provided. Again, this isn't good news for the SNP. Talk about potential tax rises and cuts to public services don't go down all that well with the electorate. And this, alongside a messy independence plan and internal party chaos, have helped to create an image of a once dominant party in a state of crisis. Now, you just spent around 8 minutes watching a video to help you learn about the world around you. And that feels good, right? Well, that's the feeling you get from spending time learning and bettering yourself. And if you want to do this more, then we have good news. Long-term supporter of the channel, Brilliant, are giving the first 200 people who sign up using our link 20% off their annual premium subscription. Brilliant is an interactive online learning platform which is full of all kinds of courses which can help you improve your career and further improve your understanding of the world. They have more than 100 courses on everything from predicting with probability to how technology works to the concept of infinity. And these may sound like topics that you need to dedicate a lot of your time to, but you really don't. You can master big concepts in as little as 15 minutes a day, and you can do this anywhere, anytime. You can find the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and thanks again to Brilliant for supporting TLDR.